So today we're going to discuss rounding numbers with number lines. Today's date, we're going to go ahead and put that in our notebook. And so rounding in decimals using number lines. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and flip to that page in my notebook. That's a continuation of the notes that we took in class yesterday, and a continuation of the video you watched for homework last night. Alright, so you need this page from day 27. I should have given you this page in class. You don't have this in your notebook necessarily, or in your binder. So it asks, how can you use a number line to round 14 and 235 thousandths to the nearest tenth? Well, there's a lot in there. I need to underline my tenth place first to start off with in this number. And in the tenths place, there's a 2. So think about what the possible answer will be since we need to round to the nearest tenth. Okay? They created a number line for us here in the first step. So 14 and 2/10, because that's already what I have. I know it's between 14 and 2/10, and then 14 and 3/10. And then I have to think about, my next step is to think about where 14 and 325 hundredths will fall on the number line, and to place a smiley face on the line where the number will fall. Okay? When I check, I know 14 and 235 thousandths will fall about right here. How do I know that? Well, because it's 14 and 2/10 here, 14 and 3/10 here, 14 and 14, oh, excuse me, I'm counting the wrong way, I'm sorry. It's 14 and 21 hundredths here, because I'm between 14 and 2/10 and 14 and 3/10. It's 14 and 22 hundredths here. It's 14 and 23 hundredths there. 14 and 24 hundredths here. 14 and 25 hundredths here. 14 and 26 hundredths here. 14 and 27, 14 and 28 hundredths, 14 and 29 hundredths, and then it would be 14 and 3/10, or 14 and, remember we can put that little 0 there, 14 and 30 hundredths. Okay, so somewhere between 14 and 23 hundredths and 14 and 24 hundredths, there's 14 and 235 thousandths. So my smiley face is there, indicating that that's where my number would fall. Now I've got to think, if I'm thinking about tenths place, is it closer to 14 and 2/10, or is it closer to 14 and 3/10? Well, it's closer to 14 and 2/10. And that's how I would round that number. We're going to look at one more example, which we will do in your notebook. You're going to glue this page right here in your notebook, and we're going to do your second example actually in your notebook. Okay? So the second example, if I had the number 13 and 627 thousandths, and I want to round it to the nearest tenth, I'm going to make my number line, obviously, and look at my tenths place. Well, in the tenths place already, there's 13 and 6/10, so I'm going to write that at the beginning, 13 and 6/10. Then I know my next tenth is 13 and 7/10, and I've got to think what's in between those two. Well, if I'm thinking in between those two, I know this, there's a little 0 in the end right here to determine the hundredths place, so this is like 13 and 61 hundredths, 13 and 62 hundredths, 13 and 63 hundredths, 13 and 64 hundredths, 13 and 65 hundredths, 13 and 66 hundredths, 13 and 67 hundredths, 13 and 68 hundredths, 13 and 69 hundredths, and then there's 13 and 7/10. Well, now I need to think about, where does 13 and 627 thousandths fall in between all of this? Well, I know I see a 2 in the hundredths place, so it's probably between 13 and 62 hundredths and 13 and 63 hundredths. Since there's a 7 right here, it's closer to 13 and 63 hundredths than it is anything else. Okay, so that number would probably be right here where that dot is. And now if I think about which tenth is it closest to, 13 and 6/10 or 13 and 7/10, it's closest to 13 and 6/10. Okay? 13 and 6/10. And for the silly saying, or kind of the tricky part, I want you to write this number that I'm going to write right now, and I'm going to write the number in expanded form. I want you to show me this number in standard form, in regular decimal form. Plus 6 times 1/100th plus 8 times 1,000th. Be able to show me that number in standard form tomorrow.